If you take a look at the bond market, I mean, 10 years just went to 1.5%. There is a great disconnect in terms of what is expected in terms of inflation between markets and the central bank.
1.5% is not high. So you
But that was the target for year end, and here we are talking about it in February.
But nobody knows what targets are. If you look at pre-COVID, just a year ago, the 10-year was 2%. So we're not even back to where we were pre-COVID. And if you go back to inflation cycles, the 10-year is 3%, 3.5%. And pre-2010, the 10-year was 4% and 5%. So 1.5% in the big scheme of things is not a huge bounce back. I do think the market's inflationary expectations are rising. And I think they will rise as some parts of the market, energy, oil, metals, minings, you can see that. So I wouldn't be surprised if the 10-year continues to rise and spike up. But I think the short end, the policy rates will stay anchored. I don't think, so you'll see a steepening of the yield curve without a doubt. But that's not going to change the capacity of the market to be able to borrow cheap and continue to spend. Because that's driven to a large extent by the policy.
Do you see mispricing in assets?
Well, financial assets by every token, I mean, I'm not have all the metrics, but by most tokens, financial assets and financial markets are overvalued. So the fundamentals and cash flow are hard to, I mean, on the basis are hard to support 100, 150 times or 200 times price earnings. I mean, there's no logic to that. But on the other hand, like I said, money is ample and money is cheap. And money's got to find a home. And therefore, it's a supply-demand question more than a fundamentals question at this stage.
Money ample, money cheap, and hence we're seeing this retail mania. Is there reason to be concerned, or this is just, I don't know, democratization of financial markets?
I think like all of the manias, there will be choppiness. And I think you will see sharp corrections. Because when you're only being driven by supply-demand, then demand vanishes based on fear and greed. So sooner or later, when the 10-year hits, 1.5, 1.72, markets will spook. Somebody will say, oh my God, we should start selling. And then you create a downward spiral. So I anticipate a correction without a doubt, because that's what happens when these cycles happen.
Piyush, I want to talk about the new government in the U.S. I mean, we have a new president in President Joe Biden. Are you more encouraged that there'll be greater stability? Are you more encouraged, despite the fact that he has indicated he will still adopt a pretty hot stance towards China?
I think in terms of geopolitics, what you said is correct. I don't think the U.S. stance to China will change fundamentally, because I think there's a bipartisan and frankly public belief that you need to push harder on China to get China to play by the rule book, which includes principally access to markets and making sure there's a level playing field, including intellectual property. So I think everybody buys into that in the US, and I don't think they will change the underlying agenda. In fact, in some ways, you will find that in other areas, human rights, that agenda will be dialed up. The Democrats are always more focused on the human rights issues and etc., so they will dial that up. But I think half the problems with the US-China discourse wasn't the substance, it was the form. And the form will change. So I think you will have more adult conversations. I think people will try to play by existing norms and rule books. I think the Biden administration will try to create a better coalition working with NATO and the Europeans and getting more people together in the process. And the fact that the conversation will be less trenchant and less strident, I think that will help soothe nerves. And frankly, if the nerves are less frayed, people will be able to do a lot more.
What do you hope the Biden administration would mean for policy towards Asia? And I'm just also wondering, given how polarized the U.S. People are, whether President Biden will be more concerned about domestic issues as opposed to foreign affairs.
Well, from everything that the administration is saying, I think they do want to get America to play a leadership role again in global affairs. From an inward-looking, make America great, and in his last speech at NATO, I think he said America is back. So I do think that there is an agenda to make sure that the US plays its leadership role, and particularly over the next decade, that leadership role is going to be extremely important. making sure that the Bretton Woods system and the rule-based order, which was actually orchestrated by the US, that continues to have a relevant role as we try to rebuild for a new order and a new society, etc. So I think they will be active. Now, how active they are in the context of Asia and South China Sea issues, ASEAN issues, etc., is not that easy to say. President Obama had this pivot to Asia, but when you actually look back, you didn't see that much of a pivot. And so I am not a soothsayer. I don't know how much the pivot to Asia will actually manifest itself. I do hope it does, because like many of our leaders have said, for Asia as a whole to have a balance between China and US has been very constructive. Our region has done well because for the last 50 years, it's been a region of geopolitical stability, but also geopolitical balance. And Lee Kuan Yew was very fond of saying that the US presence in this region is extremely helpful for all of us. So if I had to express a wish, I would be very hopeful that the US does step up participation in this part of the world.